Hi everybody, it's me Charani. Welcome to another storytelling week. Today I have a story that is coming in two parts. So then I'll be reading part 1 this week and then you'll look forward to reading part 2 next week. So without further ado, let's just get started, right? Hua and Dua Txoo, part 1. There are many tales of a sad love story, so tragic that we all wish that it stays a story. But many of these sad tales come from the truth, and perhaps this story was a small truth. Dua Txoo came from prestige and respectable family. She lived a privileged life under the strict watch of her family. Her father is the leader of their clan and minister of the 2 seas. Her mother is the daughter of a former minister. Her parents' marriage was strictly political. As the only daughter and the youngest of her siblings, her family had many expectations for her. Dua Txoo was an excellent warrior. From a young age, she excelled in her martial arts and studies. Her parents and grandparents groomed her to be the ideal heir of the Fang clan, and she believed it until she met Hua. Hua was brought to serve the Fang family. As an orphan, he had no one. He moved to and back from his relatives, but no one truly wanted a cursed boy. How was he cursed, you may ask? Simply because he had always had bad luck, or the birthmark on his face was too ugly that people call him a misfortune. Despite his wrong place at the wrong time ordeal, Hua was a hard-working boy who wanted nothing but peace and quiet. And of course, their first meeting wasn't exactly all sweet. They first met when they were 13. At that time, Dua Txoo was very much like her siblings, rude and biased. "Children, this is Hua. From this day forward, he will be your friend," replied father. "Why does his face look like that? Why couldn't you invite someone more proper to be your friend?" asked Blong, the oldest of the 3 siblings. "Because I want you 3 to learn a valuable lesson," replied father sternly. "To not be dirt poor," teased Chang, the middle child. "No, that the rich should love the poor," said father disappointedly. The children stayed quiet as they knew their father was serious. "Dua Txoo, I expect nothing less from you," replied father. Dua Txoo slightly let out a smile to please her father's wishes. When their father left them to be alone with Hua, the brothers wanted nothing to do with him and left. "I hope that we get along well, Lady Dua Txoo," replied Hua, greeting her with joy. Dua Txoo examined Hua from head to toe. There was nothing special about the boy, other than the fact that he was poor. She then let out a disappointing sigh. "Look, I know my father wants us to be friends, but I don't want to associate myself with you. So let's make a deal," replied Dua Txoo. "A deal?" asked Hua. Dua Txoo nodded her head happily. "Don't act like you know me when we're out in public, and when my father is watching, we can pretend to be friends. In exchange, I'll protect you," replied Dua Txoo proudly. "Protect me? From what?" asked Hua confusedly. "Since my father took you in, you're a part of this family now, but your origin will always get you targeted." "I mean, you'll get bullied," said Dua Txoo. Hua did not like that kind of idea and slowly swallowed his saliva. "Okay, it's a deal," replied Hua. Dua Txoo grinned with satisfaction and shook his hand. From that day onward, their deal was put through the test. It's been half a year now. Hua attended school with his siblings, but he was always alone. None of the children wanted to be his friends. At first, Dua Txoo paid no mind to Hua's isolation. She would often keep her end of the deal as well, saving Hua from the school's bully, Mo, who was friends with Dua Txoo's oldest brother, Blong. But that was only when she paid attention. Oftentimes, Hua would get extra beatings from Mo after class or after school. One evening, as the family was getting ready to have dinner, Hua's seat was empty. "Where's Hua?" asked father sternly. Their father had always been keen on time. Everyone exchanged dull looks at each other. "Honey, who cares if the boy shows up late? He can eat later," replied mother. "It's rude to eat before everyone is seated," replied father sternly. Their mother let out a stressful sigh and ordered that one of the workers go get Hua. A moment later, the worker returned and told the family to eat ahead, as Duha has caught a cold and does not want the family to get ill. He seemed fine this morning, replied Father concernedly. Father, you act like as if Duho is your only child, replied Blong angrily. He is a child I promised to look after, replied Father. It sounds like you pamper him more than us, murmured Ching. Despite the start of a rough evening, the family had dinner without Duho, and as the night was getting late, Donzong was headed to her room when she overheard her parents talking in their room. Are you sure you had someone bring medicine to Duho? Asked Father. Of course I did. Why would you think I don't care about that boy? Asked Mother angrily. It's because you never liked him, said Father. Why did you bring him into the family? People are saying we brought in a misfortune, and soon our lives will befall a horrible curse, replied Mother angrily. Since when did you listen to gossips? Asked Father curiously. Since it concerns our family's reputation, replied Mother. Donzong quickly made haste over to the workers' quarters. The lights in Duho's room was lowly lit. She slowly crept to the door and lightly tapped on the door. Come in, replied Duho weakly. Donzong opened the door to see Duho leaning against the wall. His breath was short and his face was pale. Oh, Lady Donzong, what are you doing here? Asked Duho, a bit startled to see her. Donzong entered inside and closed the door behind her. I heard that you were sick. Rather than sick, you look more in pain, replied Donzong. Well, I'm sick and in pain. You should leave. I don't want you getting sick, replied Duho urgently. Did you at least take medicine? Asked Donzong. Duho nodded his head slowly. Donzong let out a sigh of relief, and as she was ready to leave, she saw a small cloth covered in blood underneath a pillow. Donzong then pulled off Duho's cover to see his small frame covered in blood and bruises. Donzong was appalled. Some were fresh and old bruises that has begun to bleed. You're not sick. You've been beaten, cried Donzong angrily. Duho hushed her tiredly. I'm fine. Don't make a big deal out of it, replied Duho weakly. Why didn't you just ask for help? Asked Donzong furiously. I was just unlucky, smiled Duho. Donzong was left in utter silence. She thought he was a complete fool to be smiling in such an agonizing situation. In truth, Donzong has never met a person like Duho, who has lived a difficult life and has had his fair share of neglect. Maybe it was because she was curious or that she truly wanted to understand why a person can still smile when they're suffering. After that, Donzong began to change her attitude towards Duho. At first, she observed him from afar. She followed him like a shadow. As the weeks passed by, the time when her grandparents were making their yearly visit, as usual, has come. The meeting between Donzong's grandparents and Duho was very unsettling. In fact, it was demeaning and uncomfortable. I heard that he is a boy with many misfortunes. Why did you even bother to take him in? Asked Grandma coldly. Duho, who sat across from Donzong, wore a plain expression. Despite hearing the ill words they spoke about him, he did not fight back. Donzong felt suffocated in that room, full of individuals who cared about no one other than themselves. And she thought to herself, was I like that as well? The very thought of it gave her goosebumps. She felt horrible for acting the way her grandparents are. Can you all shut up? Shouted Donzong, who has had enough of their disgusting behaviors. Her family was in disbelief to hear her say such vulgar words from her mouth. I beg your pardon? Asked Grandpa sternly. Donzong made eye contact with Duhua, who was also surprised by her sudden outrage. She then quickly averted her eyes and swallowed her regret. Isn't it embarrassing to talk about a person in front of them? Asked Donzong coldly. Her grandparents exchanged looks of confusion as her mother motioned for her to not challenge their authority. Don't you know that he is nothing but bad luck? Asked Grandma confusedly. We were all born with bad luck. Ours just hasn't come yet, replied Donzong angrily. No, you were born with good or bad luck. That is why we are rich and he is poor, replied Grandpa. You're wrong, Grandpa. Luck is just a word. We all will suffer in some way, so don't speak ill of someone's life, replied Donzong sternly. Donzong sat outside in the cold rain and on her knees that evening as punishment for correcting her grandparents. She cleared her mind of rage and disappointment at her family, and as she was reflecting on the values she grew up with, Duho came over to her side and kneeled down next to her with a huge banana leaf over their heads as shelter from the rain. You shouldn't have challenged your grandparents. If you said nothing, you wouldn't have been punished, replied Duhua, making small talk. Donzong clenched her hands into fists and gritted her teeth. I was only protecting you, cried Donzong angrily. Duhua was startled by her outbursts and slightly smiled at her actions. You keep telling me that I'm a fool for getting into trouble. Now, look who's talking, teased Duhua. Donzong had many mixed emotions run out of her that night, but above all, the emotion that she felt most comfort with was relief. Disappointed by the way Donzong was disciplined, her grandparents decided to move in with them to discipline the children altogether. But despite it all, Donzong had no intention of losing her free will. She and Duhua became best of friends. Whenever Donzong can sneak out of disciplinary class, she would go straight to Duhua. She would follow him into the woods to pick out herbs. He taught her how to survive out in the woods, how to trap and to build a fire. In exchange, Donzong taught Duhua hand-to-hand combat and how to shoot with a bow and arrow. Before they knew it, they had become adults in their 20s. It was nearing the 12th month when the most popular festival, the New Year festival, was held. Like any other folks in town, Donzong's family intend to make a grand entrance with Donzong as she has reached marriageable age. Although she has made a name for herself in the world of martial combat, this year will be different as she will be presented to eligible bachelors. I don't understand why Mother is dressing me up in flashy dresses, complained Donzong. Duhua, who was busy picking herbs, slightly chuckled underneath his breath. Isn't it obvious? You turned 20 this year. That means suitors will be lining up by the doors to court you, smiled Duhua happily. That sounds exhausting. I'd rather see the world, replied Donzong coldly. Duhua then came over to sit next to Donzong on the small boulder. You don't want to get married? Asked Duhua, who was curious to know. I have 2 annoying brothers. Why would I want an annoying husband? Asked Donzong. Duhua began to chuckle. If your future husband hears that, he'll be sad, teased Duhua. Besides, do I really need to get married to define who I am? Asked Donzong. People get married because they don't want to be alone, replied Duhua. Then do you plan to get married? Asked Donzong, as a subtle joke to him. It would be nice to find a partner who I can be with for the rest of my life, replied Duhua. What kind of partner? Asked Donzong curiously. Duhua smiled and turned to look at Donzong for a long time. Maybe someone like you, replied Duhua in all honesty. Donzong was startled by his honesty. As she slowly looked away, Duhua began to laugh out loud, as Donzong thought he must have played her. She pushed him off the boulder as she looked away in anger. I'm sorry for laughing, but I wasn't kidding, you know. I really want to have a special relationship, just like ours, replied Duhua. Donzong's heart began to beat. For the first time in her life, her heartbeat for her best friend felt strange and different. Don't joke with me, or I'll really hit you, shouted Donzong, making a fist at him. Duhua had nothing else to say but laugh at her angry expression. The New Year festival had come. Donzong was forced to be dressed in her best, and although the jewelries were heavy and the layer of clothes was suffocating, Donzong had no way of escaping from her mother's grasp. Mother, can I go watch them bullfight? Asked Donzong excitedly. Bullfighting is not ladylike, replied Mother with a smile. But you always allowed me to go watch them in the past, replied Donzong. That's because this year you are an adult, not a child, replied Mother sternly. I see. Then as an adult, I don't need permission from my mother to go watch bullfighting, smiled Donzong, as she released her entangled arm from her mother's. But before she could escape, her brothers grabbed a hold of her. Let me tell you something, child. If you disrespected suitors in any way, I'll make sure that Duhua suffers the consequences of your actions and words today, replied Mother angrily. Donzong was awestruck to hear her mother use Duhua against her. You wouldn't, replied Donzong angrily. He'll get 5 whips for each suitor you turn away, replied Ching with a grin. Donzong was in disbelief that her mother and brothers would do this to her. Just how desperate are you guys to do this? Asked Donzong sternly. Desperate enough. Now, go and mingle, replied Blong, and pushed Donzong to join the courtship. The New Year festival was to last a month, and within that month, Donzong was expected to woo her potential suitors. Although it wasn't Donzong's cup of tea to converse with strangers, she still pretended to be interested, for the sake of her friend. Her family would watch from a close distance, smiling from ear to ear as Donzong puts on her masquerade face. "Donzong, is that you?" smiled an oddly annoying voice. Donzong turned around to see Chimo standing behind her with a smile on his face. Donzong was disgusted to see his face, as she quickly turned to the front to pretend to ball toss. "Cold as always. How have you been?" asked Chimo, pushing the suitor away from her side. Donzong pretended to hear nothing. Chimo then leaned closer to her ear and whispered, "Blanc told me that if you don't attempt to make small talks with potential suitors, Duho will be punished in your stead," said Chimo. Donzong was done with this blackmailing. She then turned to look at him with a hatred look on her face. "What do you want?" asked Donzong angrily. Chimo smiled and leaned away from her. "I just want to talk and take a stroll with you," smiled Chimo. Donzong could punch the lights out of him, but she held herself back, and then she slightly smiled. "Sure, if it's walking, I don't mind getting away from my family's sight," replied Donzong, and followed Chimo around the boundary of the New Year festival. "Who would have thought that you'd grow into a beautiful woman?" replied Chimo, walking ahead of her. Donzong gagged quietly in disgust. "Honestly, it'd be quite the talk of the town if I married you," smiled Chimo. "Why would it be the talk? There's nothing special about our relationship," replied Donzong. Well, because I'm Blong's best friend and you're his only sister," replied Chimo. "But there's no need for you to court me. You're a married man," replied Donzong. Well, I can always divorce," replied Chimo happily. "Wow, you'll divorce your wife just for me? That's so romantic," said Donzong in a sarcastic tone. "You sound disappointed in me," laughed Chimo. I am," replied Donzong. Chimo then turned around, a bit unhappy with her attitude. "Why are you being so rude? I'm older than you," replied Chimo angrily. "Aren't you embarrassed to be courting your best friend's little sister? Especially when my brother knows you're obviously married. And if you didn't know, I'm carrying on my family's name, so my husband would have to marry into my family. And I don't think you qualify," replied Donzong. Chimo was enraged and laughed in disbelief. "You really do deserve to carry your family name," replied Chimo sarcastically. Donzong smiled and nodded in content. "But let me tell you this. I won't let anyone marry you unless it's me," replied Chimo angrily. "For sure the person I'll be marrying is not you," said Donzong, and left Chimo by himself. Donzong returned home to see her brothers whipping Duho at the main house. She ran to push Ching away from whipping Duho anymore. "What are you doing?" shouted Donzong angrily. "You didn't hold up your end of the deal. I'm only doing what I said I was," said Ching angrily. "Chimo told me that you insulted his pride and manhood," replied Blung disappointedly. "Oh, everything I said about him was nothing but the truth," laughed Donzong. "But still, you don't go and say it to their faces," replied Blung. "You're such a hypocrite. You insult Duho to his face all the time," shouted Donzong in disbelief. "That's because he's just a worker," replied Blung. "Where's father?" asked Donzong, who has had enough of this. "Out of town for a business trip," replied Ching with a smile. "So, you're using this opportunity to get back at Dad," replied Donzong. "That's not the issue here. It's the fact that you insulted my best friend," replied Blung. "Your friend was courting me, when he is married and has kids. That is wrong," shouted Donzong. "I gave him permission to court you," shouted Blung. Donzong was awestruck as she stepped away from her brother. "You what? What is wrong with you?" asked Donzong in disgust. "His marriage is failing. He's been drinking and gambling. When he saw you at the festival, he asked if it was possible to court you, saying that you could probably save him," said Blung. "And you believed him?" asked Donzong angrily. "Why do you hate him so much?" asked Blung confusedly. "Because his family are corrupt and cheats the poor. He gets drunk and fights innocent people for no reason. He neglects his wife and children. He is no better than trash. And you want to know why I hate him? As his best friend, I thought you knew what he is like. I don't know if I should be mad at Chimo or disappointed at you. You're my brother. You're supposed to protect me, even from your best friend," replied Donzong in a broken voice. Donzo walked away from her brothers and tended to Duho's wounds. As he lays in his room with deep wounds on his back, Donzo cried with many emotions coming out. I know that it's selfish of me to say this right now when you're badly hurt, but can you hug me? Cried Donzo. Duho let out a laugh and motioned for her to come closer to him. He held her in his arms as she cried out in anger and sadness. You did well today, whispered Duho gratefully. The following days, Donzo had invited Duho to the festival with her. She locked arms with him so that no one would get near her, nor would her family harass Duho. She did everything together with Duho, and unknowingly, their closeness sparked quite the controversial conversation in town. People began to gossip about how the Fang household would eventually fall into ruins if the daughter ends up falling in love with the unfortunate boy. With many unprecedented rumors floating around, Donzo's family had no intention of tarnishing their reputation. If Donzo wasn't ready to try to court, then their family will bring the bachelors to her. So that was part 1 of Duho and Donzo's sad love story. I know I kind of left it off at a very awkward place, but it's all for the good intention. So I hope y'all look forward to next week with part 2 coming out, and I hope y'all enjoyed this one. So without further ado, I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye!